It's a strange thought. For most of human history, we weren't alone. We shared the planet with other kinds of humans. They weren't monsters or missing links. They were people. They made tools. They hunted. They loved their families. They buried their dead. And now they're gone. All of them. Only we, Homo sapiens, are left. The question is why? Why did we survive when everyone else vanished? There's no single, simple answer. It's not like there was a championship match where we won and they lost. The process was slow, messy, and took tens of thousands of years. It was a complex mix of advantages, circumstances, and maybe a bit of luck. To understand it, we have to go back and meet the family. First, there were the Neanderthals. They're the most famous of our extinct relatives. For a long time, we pictured them as brutish, hunched-over cavemen. That picture is wrong. Neanderthals were incredibly successful. They thrived in Ice Age Europe and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than we've been around so far. They were tough. Their bodies were stocky and powerful, built for the cold. Their brains were, on average, slightly larger than ours. They were expert hunters, taking down mammoths and woolly rhinos with heavy thrusting spears. They controlled fire, made sophisticated stone tools, and cared for their sick and elderly. We found Neanderthal skeletons with healed injuries that would have been fatal without help from the group. They had a culture. They maybe even had some form of art and basic language. They were not failures. They were the masters of their world. Then there were the Denisovans. We know much less about them. They're a ghost species, mostly known to us through a few tiny bone fragments and teeth found in a single cave in Siberia. But from those tiny fragments, we've extracted their entire genome. Their DNA tells us they were a sister group to Neanderthals, and they were widespread across Asia. They interbred with Neanderthals and with our own ancestors. People in modern Melanesia and Australia carry a significant amount of Denisovan DNA, which suggests these ancient humans were adapted to a huge range of environments, from the cold mountains of Siberia to the tropics of Southeast Asia. And there were others. On the Indonesian island of Flores, there was Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit for its tiny size. They stood about 3.5 feet tall, with small brains, but they weren't primitive. They hunted, made tools, and survived on that island until about 50,000 years ago. Their existence shows just how diverse the human family tree was. In other parts of Asia and Africa, remnants of even older groups, like Homo erectus, might have still been hanging on. The world was a lot more human, in a lot more ways, than it is today. Then we showed up. Homo sapiens. We evolved in Africa around 300,000 years ago. For a long time we stayed there. But somewhere around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, one small group of us left Africa and began to spread across the globe. And wherever we went, sooner or later, the other humans disappeared. It wasn't instant. In Europe, we coexisted with Neanderthals for at least 5,000 years. We met them. We lived near them. We even had children with them. Most humans today whose ancestry is from outside of Africa have about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA in their genes. It's proof that they didn't just vanish. A part of them was absorbed into us. But as a distinct species, they disappeared. So did everyone else. So what was our secret? What did we have that they didn't? The debate among scientists is fierce, but the answers seem to cluster around a few key areas: our minds, our social structures, and our bodies. Let's start with the mind. There's a theory that Homo sapiens underwent a cognitive revolution around 50,000 years ago. It wasn't that our brains suddenly got bigger, it was that we started using them in a new way. The evidence for this is in the things we started making. Suddenly, the archaeological record explodes with stuff we'd never seen before. We see complex bone tools like needles with eyes, showing we were making tailored clothing. We see spear throwers, or atlatls, that let us hurl projectiles farther and with more force than a Neanderthal ever could. We see fishhooks and nets. Our toolkit became diverse, specialized, and was constantly changing. Neanderthal tools, by contrast, were very effective but also very static. Their main toolkit, the Mousterian, remained largely unchanged for over 200,000 years. It was a good toolkit, a Swiss Army knife for the Ice Age, but we had a whole workshop. If we needed a new tool, we invented it. This suggests a new level of creativity and problem solving. We were innovators. They were traditionalists. In a stable world, tradition works fine. But the Ice Age was anything but stable. The climate was constantly shifting, with temperatures swinging wildly. Forests would become grasslands, and grasslands would become icy plains. Our ability to adapt and invent new ways of surviving was a massive advantage. The biggest sign of this new way of thinking was symbolic culture. We started making things that had no practical purpose. We made jewelry from shells, teeth, and ivory. We painted stunning images of animals on cave walls in places like Lascaux and Chauvet. We sculpted female figures. We buried our dead with elaborate grave goods like beads and tools, suggesting a belief in an afterlife. These things, art, symbolism, religion, are all about abstract thought. They're about creating a shared world of meaning that exists only in our collective imagination. Why is this so important? Because shared symbols are the glue that holds large groups of strangers together. You can cooperate with your immediate family because you know and trust them. But how do you cooperate with 100 people you've never met? You do it through a shared identity. A shared belief in a spirit, a shared tribal marking, a shared story. This allowed Homo sapiens to build much larger and more complex social networks than other humans. This leads to the second big theory, our social life. Neanderthals seem to have lived in small, isolated family groups. Their genetic evidence shows a lot of inbreeding, suggesting they didn't mix much with neighboring clans. They were family people. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, were networkers. Our campsites were larger. And we traded. Archaeologists find seashells hundreds of miles inland. They find obsidian tools far from the volcano they were mined from. This wasn't just about economics, it was about creating alliances. It was a social safety net. Imagine two groups of hunters. One is a Neanderthal family of 15. The other is a sapiens group of 50, who are also allied with three other groups down the valley. Now imagine a bad winter. The mammoths move away. The Neanderthal group is in serious trouble. If their hunters fail, they starve. But in the sapiens group, if one hunting party fails, they can rely on the others. Or they can call on their allies in the next valley, who might be having better luck. They can share information, food, and people. Over the long term, these larger interconnected networks are just more resilient. They can absorb shocks better, and in a war of attrition against a changing climate, resilience is everything. This networking ability was probably supercharged by one of our key adaptations, sophisticated language. We don't know for sure what Neanderthal language was like. They had the hyoid bone in their throat necessary for speech, and their brains had the areas associated with language. They probably could talk, but maybe their language was simpler, more focused on the here and now. There's a deer. Let's hunt. Our language is different. We can talk about things that don't exist. We can talk about the past and the future. We can tell stories. We can gossip. Gossip sounds trivial, but it's incredibly important for social bonding. It's how you learn who to trust, who's a cheat, who's a good ally. It's how you manage relationships in a large group. Storytelling is even more powerful. It's how you transmit vast amounts of information about the landscape, about animals, about social rules, about your people's history from one generation to the next. This ability to build a detailed, shared mental map of the world would have been a game changer. It allowed us to coordinate our actions on a scale that other humans simply couldn't match. Then there are the biological and demographic factors. It might have come down to a simple numbers game. Some researchers suggest that Homo sapiens had a slight reproductive edge. Maybe our birth rates were slightly higher, or our infant mortality was slightly lower. Even a 1% advantage doesn't sound like much, but over 1,000 years, that compounds into a massive population difference. We might have simply outbred the Neanderthals. We replaced them not through a violent conquest, but by just having more babies, more consistently over a very long time. Our bodies might have played a role too. Neanderthals were powerful, but their stocky builds were metabolically expensive. They needed a lot of calories just to stay alive, especially in the cold. Our bodies, which evolved in Africa, were leaner and lankier. We were built for endurance running and walking, making us more energy efficient. We could cover more ground with less food. This ties into our diet. Neanderthals were often top-level carnivores. They specialized in hunting large game. That's a great strategy when large game is plentiful. But when the climate shifted and the megafauna started to disappear, they were in a bind. We, on the other hand, were the ultimate generalists. We were omnivores who would eat anything. Big game? Great. But if that wasn't available, we'd happily eat rabbits, birds, turtles, fish, shellfish, nuts, roots, and berries. We had the technology like nets, snares, and fishing hooks to exploit a much wider range of food sources. When the main course disappeared from the menu, Neanderthals might have starved. We just ordered from the a la carte menu. This dietary flexibility made us incredibly adaptable. We could move into almost any environment on Earth and find something to eat. So, we have a better brain for innovation and abstract thought. We have a more complex social life that builds large networks. And we have a more efficient body and a more flexible diet. You can see how these advantages start to stack up. When our ancestors moved into Europe, they didn't arrive as a conquering army. They probably arrived as small scattered bands, but they had a toolkit, both mental and physical, that gave them a slight edge. Imagine a valley with a resident Neanderthal group. A Sapiens group moves in. They don't fight. The valley is big enough for both, but the Sapiens group has better projectile weapons, so they hunt more safely and efficiently. They have a broader diet, so when the reindeer herds move on, they can switch to fishing in the river and trapping squirrels. Their social network connects them to a group in the next valley, who warn them about a coming harsh winter. They have needles to make better-fitting clothes that keep them warmer. The Neanderthal group, meanwhile, is struggling. Their hunts are less successful. They don't have a backup food source. They are more exposed to the cold. Their population shrinks slightly. The sapiens population grows slightly. Now repeat that process in thousands of valleys over hundreds of generations. It's not a war. It's a slow demographic replacement. The Neanderthals are not so much defeated as they are squeezed out. Of course, there might have been a darker side to it. We are, after all, Homo sapiens. We can be incredibly violent and territorial. It's naive to think that all encounters between our species were peaceful. There were probably conflict. A better organized, better armed group of sapiens could have easily displaced or wiped out a smaller Neanderthal family. The archaeological evidence for direct warfare is thin, but its absence doesn't mean it didn't happen. The replacement of one species by a closely related, competitive one is often a brutal process. There's also the possibility of disease. When the first Europeans arrived in the Americas, they brought diseases like smallpox and measles that devastated the native populations, who had no immunity. It's possible that our ancestors brought new pathogens with them out of Africa. These diseases might have been mild for us, but deadly to Neanderthal and Denisovan populations who had never been exposed to them. A wave of epidemics could have decimated their numbers, weakening them and making it easier for us to move in. But the final piece of the puzzle is the most surprising, and it comes from our own DNA. We interbred. They didn't just go extinct, they were assimilated. That 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA in modern Eurasians tells a story of contact, not just conflict. It means that at some point, a Homo sapiens individual and a Neanderthal individual had a child, and that child was raised among sapiens and had children of their own. This must have happened many times. The same is true for Denisovans. This complicates the picture enormously. It wasn't a simple story of us versus them. It was a story where sometimes they became us. Perhaps this was the final act. We arrived with all our advantages, social, cognitive, technological. Well, we put pressure on their resources. Our populations grew while theirs declined. In some places we may have killed them. In others we may have inadvertently infected them. And in still others, we absorbed survivors into our expanding tribes. The last Neanderthal groups became smaller and more isolated, pushed into marginal environments like the Iberian Peninsula. Eventually, the last one died, and their unique culture and way of being vanished from the Earth. Well, but their genetic ghost lives on inside billions of us. So why did we survive? It wasn't one thing. It was a cascade of interconnected factors. We were more creative and innovative. We built vast social networks held together by symbols and stories. We were adaptable generalists who could live anywhere and eat anything. We had a slightly faster reproduction rate that let our numbers swell, and when our advantages weren't enough, we were probably capable of being ruthless competitors. It's tempting to see this as a story of progress, of the best human winning out. But that's a dangerous and simplistic way to look at it. The Neanderthals were not inferior. They were superbly adapted to their world. But their world changed, and we, the weird, lanky, hyper-social apes from Africa, just happened to have the right combination of skills to cope with that change. A different roll of the climatic dice, and we could be the ones who exist only as a few bits of DNA in the genome of a dominant Neanderthal species. Our survival wasn't inevitable, it was the result of a long, complicated, and often messy process. Thinking about it is humbling. We stand here today, the last humans on Earth, not because we were destined to be, but because of a series of fortunate events and unique adaptations. We are the inheritors of a world once walked by many different kinds of people. and we carry the faint genetic echoes of some of them inside us, a silent reminder that for a brief moment in history, we were not alone.